welcome back to another episode of the Push and Pull podcast. I'm not sure if we will dedicate certain episodes. We will just have a conversation, and then probably John has to figure out whether it's one or two episodes of it. I have the pleasure of now talking to Michael Tatham Sr., and we will have an extended conversation of the roots, where he came from, and how he grew the company to where it is today. So special thanks to having you on, Michael.
Glad to be here.
So let's just start right in. In the episode prior, we were talking about you going to a construction site with your dad and first experiencing subpar processes and what value-added work means. Could you just guide us back through the story and especially focus on what value-added meant to you and how it set you on track for setting up the continuous process improvement method?
Well, at my age then, which would be in my late teens, the term value add was not part of my vocabulary.
Yeah.
The experience I had stayed with me, however, and the experience that my father gave me was to be able to look at a job site where all this activity is going on, where people are trying their best as part of their work to be busy.
Yeah.
Because in their mind, their bias, if you will, is that if you're busy and moving and busy, you're doing work, and doing work is good. And if the boss shows up on site, you don't want to be sitting, you don't want to be standing still, you want to be busy. And I find that's sort of a cultural thing, or maybe I should say a human thing, is that when somebody has the privilege of having a job and being paid to do that job, that if the authority is there, their interpretation of doing a good job is to be busy.
Yeah.
My father, on the other hand, by his behavior, taught me, not by his words, taught me that being busy is not necessarily doing work that needs to be done. As a matter of fact, when he saw his workers being very busy, he was suspicious that maybe they were doing no work at all.
Yeah.
And he once told me that if he could just get all his people, if they were not doing the important work, that rather than doing something else to look busy, he would rather they just stand there and be still and do nothing. That would make it very clear to him as a manager looking at the job site that there's people just standing there doing nothing, which gives him, a manager, an opportunity to go in and see what's wrong and see if he can utilize those smart, ready-to-work people in something that's important. Yeah. So I don't think I want to go through the whole story, but he basically saw that the job he'd given me was to be a supervisor of this particular job site. His company was basically a contracting company to municipalities, and his job was, the company's mission was to put in infrastructure under the ground. Yeah. So they worked from the surface of the earth downwards. And the infrastructure for municipalities in those days was basically hydro, piping, water, sewage, storm sewers, that kind of thing. So this job site that he put me in charge of for the day was laying some storm sewer pipe. And so he drove me out to the job site early in the morning and then left. And so there I was working with all the men on the site. And he came back about 4 hours later. It was an awful day. It was pouring rain, and the whole site that was all sand and gravel at the time and rock just turned into a mud hole. Yeah. And the men were basically all bogged down in the mud, and the truck that they were using to load to take some of the fill away was stuck in the mud, and they had to use the bulldozer to pull it out, and all of this activity was going on the site. And when my father came in, I noticed that the men started working even harder and faster, and they became very aware that the boss was showing up, and they didn't want to be, for a second, looking like they were doing nothing. So my father looked at the site for a few minutes, and then he said, "Come with me and get in the car." He was a very autocratic type of person. But he is who he is. He was my father, so I hopped in the car and followed him up. And he took me for a little ride just around the site where there was a hill at the other side with a car path up to the top of it. And we got out of the car and we could look down at the job site. And he said, "Well, what do you see there?" And I said, "Well, I see all these guys that are all working really hard, and they're all stuck in the mud and the rain, and it's really kind of a mess." And he says, "Well, do you think they're getting any work done?" No, I said, "Well, I don't think so. I think they're all, due to the rain, they're all stuck trying to get ready for work." He said, "Well, the day's half over and they're still stuck in the rain. So you're the supervisor of the job. What decision do you want to now make, and how are you going to go fix that?" And I said, "Well," and I thought it was just being funny, I thought, "Well, I'll just go down and tell everybody to go home, because we're not getting anything done, really. Yep. We're just wallowing around in the mud." It sort of, he looked at me and he says, well, okay, let's go down and do that." And so he had me back in the car, and down we went, and he told me to go and tell the guys to go home, which I did. And what I learned from that is that, to my father's perspective, is that laying pipe is really the only thing that's important on the job site. He said, "We don't get paid unless pipe goes in the ground. We get paid by the foot of pipe that we lay in the ground. Yeah. Everything else that we do to do that does not give us any income or any money. It just allows us to lay the pipe." So when I look at this, he said, I look at all that work that's being done is not value added. He didn't say not value added, but basically we said we don't get paid. Yeah. And the customer doesn't care about it. Yeah. The municipality doesn't care if we're taking soil out, putting it back, and doing all. They just want their pipes to be in. Yeah. And that's what my father got paid for. And I never forgot that. Yeah. I never forgot that to this day.
Coming from that initial value-added work, I think you were 18 at the time, and then moving on, that's where we have a connection. You spent 2.5 years in Germany, right?
That's right. Well, I went into the Canadian military as part of my military school education, and we had part of that education was to be posted to a foreign country, and Germany at that time was involved with NATO, and my Canadian forces were over there doing their role as part of NATO, and so I was shipped over to, it was due to the Berlin Wall actually going up, and when that went up, that was a stressful time and a sensitive time, and that's when the Canadian forces fortified their presence in Germany, and I was part of that intake, if you will, to Germany with NATO.
And through that military postment, you got into the engineering school, right?
So I was already sort of going through that later on. I was actually at age 18. I was actually in military school, and this was a summer job I had with my father. But going to Germany was a good experience. Really had not much to do with the work that we're doing now, but it did in my education, I guess. What I learned from that is the people in Germany are just like us. They're no different. They just live in a different part of the world and speak a different language. True. And back in those days, most of the German people I met didn't know how to speak English, and I didn't know how to speak German. But we made a great effort at trying to communicate. And, I was quite pleased as to how well we could communicate without knowing the language. Exactly. Especially with the girls.
Definitely.
There's other ways to communicate other than through the voice.
That's definitely true. Yeah. But coming back to the point, you went through engineering school. So you're an engineer by heart, and then electrical engineer. Mm-hmm. Electrical engineer, exactly. So transitioning into that part, and we had that story in the last episode as well, but you were an engineer, you were constructing parts, and you were kind of up the production floor, and you were just handing down parts to the production floor to be produced.
Yeah, well, my first job actually was working for a measurement and control engineering engineering firm. That was my first job as an engineer. And they put me into the design department, and more importantly, into the lab where we prototype and breadboard is the term. We breadboard our designs and test them out and see how they work. Try to drive out faults, drive out things that are wrong, that don't work, make problems visible, redesign. Finally, when it's ready to be put into production, we would then hand it off to the production department to have the product made. And that particular product I was working on was basically a control systems module that was part of the control systems that the company I worked for was building. And they made supervisory control systems for power dams and for hydro stations. That was their main role. So if you walk into a power station, you see all these dials and all these switches and so on. That's what the company I worked for made. So I designed a control module which had to be made, and they started making it and producing it. And I was just curious to see how it was working out in the factory floor. So I went out to the production department where women were assembling the circuit boards and putting components, inserting them into the circuit board and soldering them. Back in those days in the 60s, printed circuit boards were just a new thing.
Yeah.
And I was just beginning to get into that. And so I noticed that they were doing a great job, and I said, how's everything going? They said, it's just fantastic, everything's working just fine. How's the product? How's the control system that they were making that particular day? Oh, it's just great, everything's fine. So I went back to my department and I said, well, I didn't learn much from that. Everything but just being fine doesn't help me to improve anything. So I decided a couple of days later to go back out and be a little bit more forceful. So I asked when I went out to the production line if I could sit there and you can show me how you do your job. I'd like to work here for half a day or whatever. And they were kind of surprised at that. They said, of course, and they made room for me on the production line, and I became one of the people that they would hand off the product to, and I would do the role that they told me to do, to insert these 3 capacitors and this transistor into these slots. That would be my job, and clench the wires underneath and pass it on. That's what I do. So I did that for a while, and then they started talking. The lady downstream from me said, by the way, if you're the designer of this, why do you put this capacitor in this spot? It's really hard for me to do that. I put it in and I have to unsolder it or desolder it and put it back in again. It's really difficult. Spend a lot of time with it, and the product gets backed up in the line here, and I'm hurrying and rushing, and I feel I could make mistakes. Why do you do that? And I said, I don't know. I didn't know any better, I guess. That's a good idea. I'll take that back and make some changes. And once I answered the question, I don't know, all of a sudden there seemed to be a floodgate of conversation that came from the people on the front line. They seemed to feel that it was safe to talk to me as an engineer, that I wasn't going to blame them or put them in harm's way in any way whatsoever, or cause them to lose their job by telling me things that are going wrong. And I was really, really amazed and learned from that, because if they're holding all these great ideas, why don't they all tell us them? Well, somehow in that company there was a belief that if you bring information like this forward to the authority is going to, they're going to
talk them down.
There's going to be the fear of reprisal is in that organization for sure. I didn't have any fear of reprisal. I mean, I didn't know any better. So I just did what I felt was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So that's when I learned where the real gold in the organization is the people who do the work every day.
Yeah, and there's still, up to this day, this empowering the people, giving them a safe environment and where they're allowed to make mistakes and we're allowed to test hypotheses.
Or allowed to give them a voice so they can express what they see every day, because repetition is something that they face every day. They're doing the same thing over and over and over. And if there's something wrong, that something wrong is in their face every day over and over and over as well, and they can't say anything about it, and nobody seems to care about it, and therefore it never gets improved. But I just learned just by coming onto the production line and sitting with them that to them that was a big deal. An engineer from the research department would come in here and be just like us and want to learn from us on how to assemble the components on the board.
But I think for that part, it's more than just giving the production floor, the frontline workers a voice, but it's you actually listening to them and actively listening and trying to improve yourself by the feedback that they get or that they give.
Well, improving the product, because they were telling me what was wrong with the layout of the components on the circuit board, which I did. That was part of my design, so I can tell you what I did right away. Went back to my engineering department. I said, "Stop the production right now. We're not going to make any more like this. I'm going to redesign the layout of the board. I'm going to make it so that it's more producible, more manufacturable." Years later, I learned that manufacturability is a whole topic in manufacturing engineering in itself, and so that's my first exposure to that. But the gold of what's going wrong comes from the people who handle the product every single day, over and over and over. And if you don't know how to access that information, you have a gold mine in your organization that you're not mining the gold. It's just sitting there in the ground where gold has no problem sitting there forever, but you'll never be able to benefit from it.
Yeah, just like you said, you have to install a system and where you can actually mine that gold that is already there. It's just for you to take it.
Yeah, it's not a system that you install per se, if I can take issue with that.
Sure, absolutely.
It's more of a human psychology issue where you make people feel safe to bring forward things that they see going wrong, and also give them the confidence that whatever they say is valued, and that you don't embarrass them by saying, "Oh, that's a stupid thing to say." I mean, little comments like that can kill that desire for somebody to bring the gold forward. They'll just take the gold, put it in the ground, bury it, and you won't know it's there. And that's how it works. And so it's more psychology than it is science, for sure.
Yeah, I think for me that's the beauty of the method. It's a process improvement method on the front side, but by doing it, it's automatically a culture change if you want to go that way.
Well, to have it work really well, it is a culture change.
Yeah.
It's one of the side benefits that you get from doing this work is that the culture changes. And there's been many consulting firms that have tried to change the way people operate, to change the culture in the organization by coming in and training people and pushing a new culture. You can't push a new culture. It's like pushing a chain along the floor. You're not going to do that very well. It'll all bind up and bog down, and you'll not be successful. But what I learned was that if you go in with the objective of changing the culture, you won't change the culture. If you go in with the objective to make people part of the organization, a partner in the solutions, to make their true contribution known and visible, and reward them for that. That's just human nature, and if you run your business that way, you're going to get all that gold, and the culture will change as a result of that.
Yeah, definitely. So, you started as an engineer. You had your first job. You made your first experiences with actively listening, getting the feedback, empowering and listening to people. What was your stepping stone from being from the corporate world into becoming a consultant and working with companies to improve their processes and cultures?
Well, I was an employee as a young engineer with the company, and what I noticed going on as my career sort of slowly developed with that company, I noticed an expert from the United States came into our company, and we were making computers where the switches were in fact mechanical switches that click on and off, AND and OR gates. Digital devices were actually mechanical switches that turn on and off. They're called relays. And so inside of the control computer that we would make was just masses of relays that would be clicking on and off, and that's the logic in those days. And the time came to go solid state. And so the company that I was working with decided to hire this engineering firm in the U.S., and they just came in and said, we're going to change all those switches to semiconductor switches. And I was watching all this from the sidelines because that wasn't my role in the company, but they decided to take an order that they were already producing for a major oil company to put control systems in each of the pumping stations that go all across the country. So that's 5,000 kilometers of piping where they have pumping stations. And the order was a very large order for probably 1,000 or 1,500 control units that would go across this unit. And so they decided to change all of those units to semiconductors that were normally relays. And I thought, wow, that's risky.
Yeah.
But I was just a young engineer, and what words would I be able to bring to the table? So I went to the chief engineer and I said, George was his name, George Richards, and I said, George, this is a risky thing to do. I mean, you're putting a whole new technology into an existing customer's order. I see you're not even telling the customer you're doing that. He said, well, the customers don't care, they just want it to work. And I said, yeah, but you're putting a whole new technology into the product you're going to, that they've already bought, because it's a custom order. And if something goes wrong, that's going to be really, really, really risky and bad for the reputation that you have. Because they're accustomed to reliability and quality with what we've already been doing for over the years. And I think you should maybe start off small, maybe start off with one unit, try it out, put it on a pipeline somewhere, let it run for 6 months or 3 months. Oh, we don't have time for that. We have to do all this right away. And consulting company in the U.S., they say this is no problem. Our semiconductor switches are far more reliable than these mechanical things, and you'll never have to worry about anything. Well, I can fast forward the story, but you can probably figure it out all for yourself. They eventually went out of business. That whole contract that they gave, the units didn't work. They were subjected to temperature changes that caused failures in the field. They were subjected to electrostatic electricity, so whenever a thunderstorm took place, things would all shut down. And they weren't aware of that. And then, of course, you get into this back and forth with the consulting company, and I could just see this is going nowhere, and the company eventually went out of business, and so I was out of a job literally a year and a half, 2 years after I started working with the company. But guess what? That was a benefit, because then I got to become a senior engineer with another company, a power electronics company, and that was a good step forward for me.
Yeah. Is that the step you took to? I think you told me the story of the dam, and where you had this first experience with system thinking and getting it right the first time. When, what was it? The mayor about to cut the ribbon.
Yeah, and, that goes back to I worked for this power company, and they made regulated DC voltage power supplies that were used to power up the field circuit inside of a 100 megawatt generator.
Yeah.
And so if you want the generator, after it starts to rotate, to start generating electricity, you have to excite the field, in other words, make the field into an electromagnet. And so that's what the power from this rectifier would do, is it changes AC voltage to DC voltage. The day came when they were going to initiate the first generator. There were 10 generators that were in this power dam, way up in northern British Columbia, called the Peace River Power Project. And so the people installing the unit were testing it out, prior to when the mayor actually it was the prime minister of the province. Okay, so. I was the most senior person that in government was going to come up and do a ribbon cutting ceremony, and they were doing this by switching on the first of 10 generators that would light up a whole lot of lights, and it would be power for the first time coming from this project. But the technicians in the field were having trouble with it, because they would try to light it up, and then of course all by itself it would switch off and then it would switch on again. It was intermittent. They weren't confident that it would continue to run, and they were really unsure if they could do this ribbon cutting ceremony and not have it fail in front of the public and everything else. So the head of the company I worked for, brilliant man, brilliant engineer, entrusted me rather than sending a technician to go out there. He knew that if I went out there, I'd find the problem and fix it no matter what it was. I guess he knew something about me that I didn't know about myself then. But I got out there, and you're right. Within 20 minutes, I had identified the problem. Because when you switch the rectifier on, the vibration from the transformer would cause it to fail and switch off. And I very quickly just put my hands on the control module to kind of hold it to absorb the vibration. Yeah. And when I was doing that, it would work just fine. So I figured there's something inside that unit that's a joint that's not making a permanent connection. And as I did surgery on that, I got down into a transistor which has 3 wires coming out. They're called the emitter, collector, and the base. Yeah. And the base is where the low voltage signal goes into a transistor to control what it does. And it was a transistor is a semiconductor. And lo and behold, that wire was actually into a solder fillet. But when I took my needle nose pliers and tugged on it, I could pull it right out of the solder fillet. So it was not actually making an intermetallic connection between the solder and the wire. And all I had to do was take my soldering iron out, scrape off the wire, get a pre-soldered the tip of that wire, the solder that was in the fillet, melt them together, and that was it. Finished. Turned it back on, and it ran for the next day without a hiccup. And then the ribbon ceremony took place. Everything worked just perfectly. And I said, there it is. One little solder joint like that can shut down this whole hydro generating plant. Yeah. And that made a very important impression on me there. And when I went back to Toronto and told the chief engineer there that well, actually, he was the owner of the company, and I told him what it was. He says, I knew that was something like that, and I knew you would find it, Michael. Thank you. Yeah. So he could have said all kinds of things, but he certainly gave me all kinds of confidence by telling me, I knew you would find it. So there was telling me he knew he sent the right guy out there. And then thanked me. And so that was very important. That stayed with me forever. Yeah.
So with all that experience that you gained from the early experience with your father and getting the experience of what value added means to the listening to your production floor over that system thinking, or that the small things can cause a massive project to fail, what was the tipping point for you to go from being an employee to actually running your own business or building up a business around the things that you've learned?
Well, I guess it's a gradual evolution into your own business. I while working for this power electronics company, and the name of the company was Powertronics Incorporated. And while I was working for that company, I thought, gee, I'd like to get into electronic control systems and get into designing them and making electronic control products. So I started a little side activity. I started making electronic capacitor discharge ignition systems for cars, and making those in my basement and selling them to my friends and all the rest of it. So that started me into my own business. And that led to the next, until finally I decided to leave the power company I was working with and start my own business. Nice. And I called the company then Tatham Techni-Skills Corporation, Tatham Technical Skills. Yeah,
this is sort of one of the articles that you framed, Tatham Techni-Skills. So. Coming into that consulting part, I know that aerospace and defense was a large stepping stone for you to get your feet into the consulting business. Would you mind to elaborate?
Well, I never considered myself to be a consultant, and I never considered the business that I would form to be a consulting company. There's certainly one project leads to another, And the step I made, I think, was one of my customers was a company that made audio-visual projectors that would run off a battery and had a small 6-inch screen on it, and it would show slides or film strips. And they wanted to put an electronic system in there that would make this all happen electronically, and I got into the design of doing that. And what I was more interested in was what this audio-visual projector could be used for. And it was used for sales presentations. But what I saw there could be used for training. Mm-hmm. And I thought, one of the skills that goes on every day in industry, electronics industry, where there's no real training for it, is the soldering process. There's thousands and thousands of people doing soldering. And I thought with this little projector, I could come up with a training program to teach people on the front line how to solder.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, here I am an engineer. I didn't have any training for soldering. I taught myself how to solder in about 10 minutes. Right? So why am I putting this solder training program together? Why would I do that, and how could that be possibly a good business to do? So I decided to go out and learn from the frontline people in companies that would allow me to come in and talk to their people working on the production line to learn what's really going on in that whole soldering area.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that what most people were doing was what I did with this big power company out in BC when I fixed that solder joint. Most people were doing exactly that. They were resoldering soldering joints that didn't work right the first time. And 80% of the people in production were doing that. They were getting the product back from the test department, had these faults in it, and the faults were identified with little plastic errors, and they would go in and resolder these joints and rework them and send them back to the testing department. And that's what most of the activity was. Yeah. And then I remember my father telling me about laying pipe.
Yeah.
They're not laying pipe here.
Yeah.
They're taking pipe out of the ground, putting it back in again, taking it out, putting it back in again. And every time you take the pipe out and fix it and put it back in, it's going to be less reliable than it was if it was done right the first time. So I couldn't get that out of my mind. And so I put a solder training program together that wasn't just teaching them how to solder, but putting a message into the organization through the training that would bring a sense of doing the job only once, doing it once the first time. Yeah. And I learned that soldering is not a process that can be done twice or 3 times. It's not like when you take a picture of somebody, you take it 3 or 4 or 5 times, yeah. Then you pick out the best one. You can't do that in soldering. You have one time to take a picture, and that's the one you get.
Yeah, definitely. So for everyone who's listening, who has gone through a Tatham boot camp,
they get to know that.
They get to know that, and especially this Model A part, where you have to get it right the first time. Otherwise, you produce a lot of defects that you cannot correct, even though you want to rework.
And that's what I built into the boot camp and to that training program. That board is actually out of my solder training program.
Yeah.
This is before boot camp, and so if you try to solder this, if you try to solder it more than once, you're going to make things worse.
Yeah.
The terminal will change color, the insulation will melt, and all of this is symptomatic of errors.
Yeah.
So the challenge is you've got one time to do it, and you have to do it right. And if you do it the first time, that's what you get. If there's something wrong about what you got,
yeah,
what do you do to fix it?
Well, in boot camp, we try to give it to the rework operator, but whoever that poor person is tries their best but cannot correct it.
Yeah, and that's by design, because I see in the industry at large, everybody does rework. They solder more than the first time.
Yeah.
They solder 3, 4, 5, 6 times. It goes to the test department, comes back, solder it again, pull out the component, put another one in, take out. The tools companies in soldering actually came up with a desoldering tool.
Desoldering tool?
Desoldering. How to take the solder out of the joint in liquid form and then re-solder it. And I thought, this is all crazy. This is totally backwards to my way of
So
thinking.
they created an entire product around rework instead of getting it right the first time.
Exactly. Well, people just didn't have the time to do it right the first time, but they had lots of time to spend hours and hours fixing it up later. So, and I saw this phenomenon, and I just couldn't get it out. That just hit me, and I said, there's something wrong here. And I think most people would probably just walk away from that challenge. But for me, it's like a red flag in front of a bull. Yeah. I just see that it's like fresh meat to a lion. You know, I see that, and I just got to get in there. Everything inside of me says I got to figure this thing out. And I didn't figure it out. But what I did do is create an experience to people through the soldering program that would change their mindset to the point is I can only do this once, and I have to do everything prior to when I do it to make sure everything prior is right, because I know I've only got one chance to do this, and if it doesn't work out right, then I have to stop.
Yeah.
And I tried to get that culture in electronics companies. If it didn't come up right the first time, stop. And you'd have armies of people stopped. They stopped working. And that would tell management, you got a problem to fix here. But the culture in these companies, you got to keep working. Production line has to keep going, keep work. Faster. But, more mistakes.
The crazy thing is just what you described, just with a desoldering tool, or you have to keep it going.
Yeah.
It's just the same in today's companies. Sure. It's the same culture. Whether
hasn't changed.
Whether it's a desoldering tool or certain pieces of software just to remediate whatever rework you create.
I see the same thing.
Always the same, yeah.
So that I built into the solder training program, but that was a very special segmented market, which are people on the production line doing this work. So what I decided to do is another crazy thing that Michael Sr. is famous for, I suppose. Not by design, I just fell into it. I am who I am. I decided that if I can't get people other than the production workers understanding what this soldering process is about, that means I got to put managers through it as well. Yeah. And I get it. And I said, matter of fact, everybody in the company should learn how to solder through my system.
Yeah.
Because my system doesn't just teach the skill of soldering, it shows the whole process around it.
Yes.
And how that process has to be right. And that soldering actually is a chemical process. And when you put two chemicals together, you get a reaction and it's done.
Yeah.
You can't rework that. You can't do it over again. Or it doesn't help if you do it over again.
Yeah.
So all of that was built in to the soldering program. And then I got all the managers of the company to go through it, and the CEO of the company. He said, I'm the CEO, I don't have to learn how to solder. Well, just go through the training, you'll see there's more to it than soldering. And it took off. And I would say that probably every single electronics company in the North American continent, and in Europe too, bought that soldering program, because there was something about it that was more than just the skill of soldering. There's something, they didn't quite know what it was. Yeah. Well, I did. It was psychology and systems thinking, without saying the word.
Yeah.
You have to just do it.
You
like my father did. Just do it. Don't tell me
You just
how.
created a Trojan soldering process horse.
It was a Trojan horse, for sure. So that led to boot camp. That led to everything that we do to this day. That core belief that I learned as a very young boy has not changed to this day. It's still there. And the problem that exists is just as bad, if not worse, than it was when I was very young. It's still here today, only not in the form of soldering. It's in other forms of human behavior,
in the
how organizations work, all the rest of it.
But taking what you've learned from your soldering program, continuously improving or continuously building it into the bootcamp experience, and then your roots lay in defense and aerospace corporations, and especially what struck me when we first talked back in May of this year, when we first met, is you showed me that annual report of a very large defense contractor, and they put your process improvement and especially bootcamp on the 6th page of their annual report. So.
And talk about it all the way through the annual report as to how it has affected all their lines of businesses.
Yeah, so apparently, like you said, you did something right. You created that Trojan horse, and apparently managers, even though they probably would never solder or would never go through the frontline workers, you created something in them, or you sparked something in them that made them put you on the front page or on the 6th page? Just kind of give us the background of what the issue was initially with Rockwell, how you get in, and what developed out of it, or what made you get into the annual report.
Well, actually, I decided to put, because I was learning how to fly, or not learning, I had been flying for a while, and I had the experience of being in an aircraft simulator, and I said, this is very impressive. You get into the simulator, and within 10 minutes you forget the fact that you're in a simulator. And I start to sweat under my arms, my shirt's all wet, I'm nervous, I'm stressed.
Yeah.
Because the instructor is throwing things at me that I have to figure out what's wrong, otherwise I crash. And typically the simulator sessions, they set it up so that this is serious business. Oh, Mr. Tatham, you're a pilot, right? Yeah. And you got your license? Right, okay. And so that means you can fly and you can carry passengers, right? Okay. I just want you to know here at the simulator school, this company called Flight Safety in Wichita, Kansas, that this is serious. We don't do anything here in a simulator that's not what you would find in your own experience of flying. But if you end up crashing here, and we look at that as killing people, and when you kill somebody in the simulator, you lose your license, and so your license is at risk here. And we're not going to throw anything at you that you can't solve. You should be able to handle everything that we give you, and it may not be pretty, but you should survive and not hurt anybody. I just want you to know that. I said, thank you very much. I'm pretty confident though. I know how to fly. I've got many hours. I think I had 2,000 or 3,000 hours of flight time by then. So Monday went, and we got into the simulator. I know this is a story, you might have to cut it out, some of it out, but it was easy. I had no trouble with that at all. Taxiing around, going into various flight modes, on instruments, into icing conditions, into temperature problems with the oil, temperature problems with the engine failure, some propeller feathering exercises, gear problem, all of those kinds of things, which are kind of normal. As long as we keep flying, we're okay. The only thing that hurts pilots is hitting the ground in a vertical position. Just prevent that, you'll be fine. So that was easy. And first day, hey, I got this. I'll be out of here on Friday without any trouble. It comes Tuesday, and it's a little bit more difficult for me. It was hard work. Put me through more exercises, threw more things at me, more chaotic. I had the autopilot on. I was busy looking at my charts for doing an instrument approach landing, and while I'm doing that, I noticed the control column is turning. That's not supposed to happen. Well, I noticed the autopilot is disconnected. Now I've got to hand fly and look at these and look at my drawings, figure out the approach. It's all happening at once, and I'm sweating. Finally, I land. Okay, that's great. I got it again. I think that's it. I can't see it being any worse than that. Third day on Wednesday, we back at it again, and it's getting tough again. Only this time the same things happen. I noticed that I have a failure on the right engine, so I have to feather it, and I'm in icing conditions, and it's bumpy, and it's thunderstorms, and there's rain on this is all happening. And I'm going to try and get around and land again at this airport. And so I come around and do my approach over again, and I'm coming down the approach, and I got only one engine running, so I have to correct the yaw with rudders and so on. I've got that on. The autopilot can't overcome that, so I have to hand fly it. I get the gear down, I'm at the point of minimums now, and I have to make a decision to land. I look out the window, nothing. Can't see a thing. I'm right there. And I freeze for a moment. And the instructor says, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to just try and land anyway because I've got a serious problem. He says, no, you're not. What's your checklist say? And he says, go around. But I only got one engine. This airplane's capable of going around. Go around. Well, I'll try to. And so anyway, I did all of that. And I'm trying to do this, and I lose control, and I crash.
Wow. And what happened then?
He said, well, Mr. Tatham, that's a good experience. Good. Let's go to the briefing room, and we'll go over what you've done so you can understand what you did. And I said, okay, thank you. And I'm a little quiet, a little nervous, and still shaking. This is all a simulator. Sweating like a dog, shaking. He says, well, as I told you before, this is serious. You killed yourself and everybody. And so we have to cut the training off now. You're finished now. You'll have to go back home. I know you flew your own airplane down here for the training session, but we can't let you go back because we've got your license down. Your license is not renewed. You'll have to take an airline back. So we'll take care of that for you. Get our assistants here. We'll get you booked on a flight tomorrow morning. For the afternoon, you can just kind of relax. You can maybe book some more training when you get back to Toronto. But in another month from now, you can come back and try this again. I felt pretty bad, actually. Yeah. Phoned my wife at night. I was almost in tears because I've been flying now for some 15, 20 years, and I really know what I'm doing. I thought I was pretty hot shit, actually. Well, I didn't feel hot that night. I felt really deflated, failed. I killed myself. Next morning on Thursday, they said, bring all your bags to the office here. We'll have a car drive you to the airport. So I got all my bags there. There I was at 8:30 in the morning with all my bags. Secretary says, good morning, Mr. Tatham. Glad to see that you're here. We've got everything arranged for you. But before you go, your instructor wants to talk to you. So I went into the briefing room, and there he was. And he said, well, Mr. Tatham, are you ready to go back to training? And I said, I thought I'm done. He said, no, we do this to all pilots like you who are single pilot operators of a transport category airplane, which is what I had, carrying 9 passengers. And we do this all the time because we know that you think you're pretty good and we know that you can overcome everything. And we didn't throw anything out of the ordinary at you. But what we did find and what you found out where your limits are and that you can in fact die and when you don't look after all the killer items. So what we're going to do now is continue on with the training because we think that experience will stick with you for the rest of your life. And I said, you're absolutely right. I could have fallen on the floor. I was in tears. This is really amazing. You do this on purpose. Yes, but we need from you the promise, which I'm now about to break, never to tell another pilot who comes down here to be recertified on an airplane like yours that this is what we do to you. If you tell them that, then you'll ruin the chance for them to have the experience that you just had. And I stayed with that ever since. I never told another pilot about it. But that experience stayed with me forever. And that's what boot camp is and how boot camp came about.
Yeah.
Is it came about by putting an experience together that people could go through and say, I'll never forget that as long as I live.
It absolutely was that. Going through it the first time, I think I told you the story, was the third day of starting with my new company at that time where Michael was coming in. And the third day of my experience there was boot camp. It was the first boot camp day. And as good as anyone else, the first boot camp day might not be as emotionally draining as the experience you just described, but the first boot camp day is deflating. And by design, you go through emotions, you have that rescue mission, you try everything to fix that thing and try to deliver something to your customer, but you're just not capable of doing that. And that experience, even though it's not as emotional as the you killed yourself in an aircraft, but this deflating and very brain frying and brain draining experience, it sticks and it drives home a key point of what you just outlined in the boot camp experience.
Well, I'm glad, because that was the intent right from the.
It worked
to recreate that experience in boot camp, and no question that the process is set up to fail.
Yeah.
People that are in it are slaves to it.
Yeah.
So I use the expression slave to the system. In many companies, we are slaves to the system that's in there, and IT has made it worse.
Yeah.
And artificial intelligence, in my opinion, unless it's managed properly, is going to make it even more of a disaster. because we will be slaves to what artificial intelligence tells us to do. So we better manage that carefully. So that's what I put into the simulator boot camp, and I wanted people to experience what they go. They know they go through this every day in their job. They feel it there, and they can't fix it. And the reason they can't is because it's designed not to be fixed. You cannot fix the push company when you're running it.
Yeah.
You have to do what we do is have a rescue mission, and even that doesn't fix it.
No.
It's all set to fail. That's the intent, and people really remember that. And when they finally get to the other end, when we get to Pull Corp, they just can't imagine that anything that was as bad as it was in Push can operate so smoothly in Pull Corp.
Just the fact that out of a system that is forced against you, that you cannot overcome, even though you try as hard as possible, we have that part on where we where we ask our participants, what do you think is the hidden capacity of this crappy company that you really try your best to do that?
Come close to it.
And even in the end, after those 2 or 3 days when we come to Pool, and when we just lay against it what they initially thought was able to make out of this company and what we really achieved, that aha moment is a very strong one. Yes.
Yeah. The hidden capacity there is actually 2 to 3 times as much as what they think the maximum could possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just getting quality right the first time, deliver it on time, and create a system on where the customer is really integrated into it. But just coming back to...
Before I lose this point, there's one point about in boot camp that I wanted to make that came again from my experience on the front line, is that there was a company that believed that the employee on the front line should have the power to stop the process when they see something going wrong, and they put little buttons on the workstations. I don't know if you ever heard of this or not, but they put buttons on the workstation. So if anything goes wrong, just reach up and push the button. The production will stop. Everybody will, of course, stop.
Yeah.
And that'll bring in management, and we'll all together figure out how to fix it. We used to call it quality circles, I think, back in those days. Anyway, that was good thinking, right?
Yeah.
How many times do you think that button got pushed?
I think it was a Christmas tree.
That could be. But it got pushed maybe once or twice, and that was it.
And then they abandoned the system?
Well, nobody wanted to push the button.
Oh.
Why would that be?
Because you're then on the spot that
I see something. Who pushed that button?
Oh, yeah.
Is the first question. Who pushed that button? Oh, it was you. Why did you push that button?
Yeah. So a good intent, but not followed through properly by getting...
People don't understand the whole principle of that. Now, in Pull Corporation, you don't have to push a button. All you have to do is not have the materials, not have the right product to work on. All you need is an error. And all you do then is stop.
Yeah.
You stop because you can't finish the process. And what that does is shut the whole thing down just like the buttons do.
Yeah.
The only difference is nobody's going to say, who pushed the button? Because there's no button to push.
Yeah.
Who stopped the process? Well, I have an error here and I can't fix it. And I can't move the process or the product on, so therefore I have no choice but to stop. So that's a safer environment than reaching up and pressing a button.
So you initially started...
It's all psychology.
It definitely is. So you initially started in the engineering and production part of the world, and you slowly transitioned into the services industry. And one thing.
Well, actually, before service, I transitioned into working with a large automotive company. First letter, the name of that company starts with a capital G.
Yeah.
And the second letter starts with an M, or finishes with an M. And I worked with them, and the engineering group I was working with there said that this is all great for production, and it was, because they were putting this into many of their plants, including Mexico. And I say Mexico because the Mexican people gravitated to this more than the Americans did, which I find interesting, because they really looked at it as a job, as a privilege, as opposed to a right. And so he asked me, he says, Michael, have you ever done this in the engineering design group? I said, no, I've never done that before. He said, well, we don't make anything in engineering, but we cause everything to be made.
Yeah.
I'll never forget those words. We cause everything to be made. So why wouldn't what you do in manufacturing work in engineering?
Yeah.
And I said, well, good question. I don't have the answer. And he said, well, can we try it? I said, you're asking me, can we try it? He said, sure, we can. Let's try it and see what happens. So he was as curious about this as I was. And so we brought it into engineering at General Motors in Detroit. And you never guess what happened.
They produce better.
Took off. Literally took off. It was actually more fun and more value and more side benefits came out of that in terms of the engineering application than it came into production. And that was my step out of production and into the service industry, because the service industry doesn't make anything.
But we cause everything to be
made. But they cause everything to be made. Yeah. And so that brought me to banking, it brought me to insurance companies, it brought me to service companies, it brought me into hospitals. You don't make anything, but they certainly cause things to happen.
Or cause a lot of headache for the customers that are involved in the process.
Yeah.
But one story you told me that really stuck with me was the story of IBM Canada and the New Blue team. Could you just outline what happened there? It just struck me.
Well, the CEO and the manager of that group are now all retired, so I can tell this story. But back then I was sworn to secrecy because what was going on was, quite frankly, illegal. But if you give that to me, that's their boot camp result. So I had the entire executive team, including the CEO, marketing, research guys, all the people who were part of the IBM Canada group went through a boot camp. And they decided to do this at their golf club that they own in north of Toronto. And everybody came on the first day, and we went through the first day, which is pretty tough. But when they left the end of the first day, they thought, well, we'll have this finished, no time on the second day. It'll be a breeze. And I noticed on the second day when they all came in, they all were taking golf clubs out of their back of their cards and bringing them into the little room there where the attendants look after that. I said, that's kind of weird. When are they going to play golf? Yeah. I knew that by the time we finish here, there's no way they're going to play golf. But I didn't say anything. And sure enough, that day went rather well. They didn't leave until 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, because I made them work for it. I made them do everything, because they are really smart people running a very large, one of Canada's largest companies. I'm not going to push them through, and I'm not going to hint. They're just going to have to figure this out. And you said, you're going to stay here until we figure it out. Yeah. And when you do that, they got to do this. You can do this with senior managers. It's hard to do it with frontline people, because they finally just go quiet after a while. Senior managers don't have that choice to go quiet. They've got to do something.
Yeah.
So it was very, very successful. And I thought, well, this is so successful with this team. Rather than launch the process into another part of the business, why don't I make these people the team, the launch team? And I just thought, you're going to pick an issue. And that's up to you to pick. You must have 3 or 4 or 5 things on your list that you can say are pretty hot around here. You pick the issue, and we're going to launch you as the team. And so they call themselves the New Blue team.
Yeah.
Team New Blue. And the issue they picked, I'll never forget it, it was called the quarter end skew. Now, what is a quarter end skew? I know a skew is a stock control unit, okay, SKU, which computers and people all understand nowadays, but the skew there was spelled SKEW, which is something not being what it's supposed to be. As I got further information on that, the quarter end skew is that they noticed throughout the quarter, the revenue would rise, as each week went by. But on the last 2 weeks of the quarter, the revenue spiked from the linear level up to a peak right at the end of the quarter. And then at the beginning of the next quarter, it dropped right back down again to lower than it was the previous month and started its way back up again. And they consider that to be a very difficult thing to manage and very difficult to report that sort of result to the stockholders. And it was very difficult for the finance people to manage and all the rest of it. They wanted to get that skew eliminated and have the revenue continuously and regularly grow according to the plan and pass through the quarter without having any skew or spike on it.
Yeah.
And the team fulfilled that. And the team lasted 6 weeks. 2 of the people on that team were from Europe.
Good people.
And they said, well, to the CEO, I won't mention his name, to the CEO they said, well, I can't come back. I mean, I'm in Europe. You don't expect me to come back here every week on Friday to be part of this team meeting. And his answer was, great leader he was, his answer was, well, no, I don't expect that, but we need you to be here. But if you're not here, we'll do just fine, thank you. But everybody in the room knew that if you didn't show up at the meeting on Friday, whether you're in Europe or in the Far East or in Africa on a safari, you don't show up here, don't bother coming at all.
Yep.
They knew that was the answer. So 6 weeks later, they solved the problem. And I can go into the reason why the skew took place, but I think if you look at human behavior, it's pretty clear. The Canadian operation was highly market-driven, and they were all getting bonuses for their sales efforts. And what they were doing, I can say this now, what they were doing is they would go to their good customers and they'd say, look, we have this project scheduled, as you know, for the next quarter in your business, or the next maybe 6 months from now. Could you take delivery of the products now? We'll bill you for it. We'll ship them out, and then next month we'll take it back and we'll issue a credit, for what we sent you. That way they get the sales numbers up, they get their bonus, because it's going to come in anyway eventually. So they get their bonus, and then that was what was causing the quarter end skew. Everyone in the room knew that's what was causing it even before we launched the team. But the team allowed them to bring that out on the table safely without losing jobs. And the solution was very simple. When you ship something out, no credit can be issued within the next 6 months. It has to be a sale that stays that way, and that's all the solution was. And that ended the quarter and skew. Because if you send something out, you can't send it back and get a credit next month.
But then again, another great story to link back to bootcamp. It's something that we highlight on the first day as well. The disconnect between certain goals, or goals have to be aligned to fulfill the customer goal, and then especially in this quarter end skew, it didn't fulfill the customer needs. Like you talked about it, that the customers were just shipping it back because it wasn't the right time for them to have that piece of IBM Technic in their project.
The relationship was so good with IBM that the senior executives of the account didn't want to let down the relationship that they were having with IBM, because they were really a great support organization. But that taught me something there. Show me how a person is measured, and I will tell you how they behave.
Yeah.
So if you want to change someone's behavior, change the measurement. That's all you have to do. Yeah. And their behavior will change in a snap of a finger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what happened there at IBM. They changed the measurement. There's no way that you get your bonus by doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, but you incentivize the wrong behavior, and you incentivize people to find their ways to maximize the profit in a system that was set up for them. Again, blame the system, not the people in it.
That's right. Yeah. The system was set up to do exactly what it was doing.
Yeah.
Working just fine, thank you. You want to change it, change the measurements.
Exactly. But another thing that story told me, in transitioning into another client of yours, it has to start with the senior management.
No other way. Yeah. The senior management sets the culture for the organization. It sets the fear factor, if there is such a thing, and I think there is. Almost every company I worked for, been with had fear as a major issue in the company. Fear of reprisal, I guess, is what I could add to not just fear, but fear of reprisal. People avoided doing things that they knew that they could be reprimanded for. They just stay away from that.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not a safe environment at all to work and to be creative. Because the fear of making a mistake, if someone's going to come and beat up on you, a boss or something like that, you're going to stay quiet. You're not going to come forth with new ideas. You're going to play it safe, and play it safe doesn't help you to be a good company.
Yeah.
Or a great company.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened at the company that I started for as well. My executive team went through the same painful bootcamp experience themselves, and so it's not that like we're too stupid or we're doing something from the bottom up, but it's from the top down as well. Like Michael talked probably in the first episode about a sandwiched approach.
Right.
So you empower and you allow people in the front line to ask why, while at the same point the management knows why they're asking why, and hopefully empowering the solutions or the improvement proposal that's come from them. But especially to the management challenge, there was one story that you told me that I just had to smile, and that was the story of Bank of America. And maybe just as a backstory for our listeners, you had one of your offices you had was at the Billy Bishop Airport here in Toronto, and I'll just hand over this piece of remembrance because the photo you showed me, I think it's on the back there's a photo as well.
Yeah, it's at the airport, the CN Tower in the background.
Yeah. Could you just give us a little bit of the backstory of what happened, or who was there and what did they do to get to the Billy Bishop Airport that you've been to?
Well, this is Bank of America, and this little memory here is not something that I or the Tatham group produced. This is what they produced internally, because the experience that their executive had here in Toronto was so significant. It was such a significant emotional event for them that they wanted to put something like this together and give it to everybody that was here at a session. So they did this, and they gave me one as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, see, I'm still there. I look a lot younger there.
You're still in great shape.
Yeah, still breathing. So that's still breathing. And I can tell you which side the grass is. It's green side up. So, yeah, this is their CEO in the middle, and the entire executive management team. And what was kind of funny is that they flew up in 3 Gulfstream aircraft, Gulfstream 4 aircraft. And these are $30 million each airplane. Cost maybe one-way trip for one of those airplanes to come to Canada would be cost maybe $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So they spent maybe close to $80,000 to $100,000 to fly those 3 airplanes up here so these guys could go to boot camp.
Yeah.
And my charge for boot camp back in those days was $60,000 US for a 2-day session. The average salary of everybody there was probably in the 10, 15 million a year. The CEO I know was in the 75 million. That would be his total benefits package per year. So, that was the cost. The price that I charge is pocket change. But the experience was very valuable because they took this into the Bank of America that has 35 million customers at the time, and they just went right across the company with it. And it was just fantastic. And here I am, just one person looking after that. If I was a consultant, I'd be pretty busy. Of course, what we have is not a consulting.
Yeah.
It's something that we teach you how to fish. We don't feed you, okay? Yeah. And they went fishing throughout their company. The first year, they had booked $800 million in direct cost savings as a result of doing this work. Wow. $800 million, of which I think somewhere around 120 million was stopping some IT implementation projects that they had because they knew from boot camp that we're automating waste.
Yeah.
Rather than try to get rid of it and change our systems, change the way we work, we're just going to automate the waste, and that's how we can get rid of it so we don't have to deal with it. Put it in a computer. IT consulting companies love that. That's
Definitely.
what they are in business. So that was a great learning. They don't make that public knowledge because it's a public company. But that was one of the main findings that came out of it. And they were writing a book about the history of the company as well, and they decided to put this story like that in there. So the best part of this is that the CEO came back to Toronto 3 times and went through boot camp 3 times.
Wow.
So the second time he went through, I thought I'd be a little humorous here and mention, thank you all for coming here to Toronto, to our facility here at the Toronto Island Airport in the aircraft hangar on the 2nd floor, where you could look out the window and see my King Air, which is that model of it sitting up there in the middle. But I said, now all of you have never been through this experience, but some of you from the bank need to go through this second time in order to get it.
Yeah.
And that was the CEO. And he's the only one in the room that's going through it a second time. How could I say something like that and get away with it? Well, in my position, doing what I was doing, I could get away with it. Okay, what are they going to do?
And also, they were flying their jet airlines to the Toronto Pearson and actually took a ferry to get to you.
That's right. Oh, that's true. The CEO didn't like that ferry. It's just waiting too long. He doesn't like to wait.
Yeah,
good habit to have. So that was great. So, but I figured with that comment, if he doesn't come back ever again or speak to me again, I'll know that comment didn't go well. But they all had a good laugh over that. And for 2 days, we all had a great time. But then guess what happened? A third time, he brings a group up. Okay? So he's here for a third time. The third time, I didn't say some people take 3 times to get it. I didn't say anything because their number 2 guy in the company said, the CEO is coming up. I won't say his name. The CEO is coming up for the 3rd time, but you cannot and don't say what happens as a result of that. Each time he came up here, I would say 15% of the people that came here, maybe 20% of them, he let go. He asked them to leave the company. Because he saw how they make decisions. He saw how they responded to this exercise and to the simulator. And he said, these are people that are going to crash my airplane, the bank, okay? And he just asked them to leave. He just handed their names over to the director of HR. Okay.
Who went through boot camp himself.
After the boot camp was over, he handed their names to the director of HR and said, you know what to do with them.
Wow.
And yes, they were signed off and given their package and asked to leave the company.
Wow.
So that was the 3rd time when he came up here. So on the 3rd, knowing this, I put on the same kind of boot camp I always do. But I didn't say 30% of you aren't going to be with a job after you leave here unless you do this right, the way it was done to me in the simulator I went through. If I don't pass, I'm going to lose my license. So that's an interesting story, just to add to that.
Definitely is. So I think we're at the end of my props and my questions there.
I've overstated it.
You definitely did.
You can pick a few things out of this.
I'd hope so, but just to frame it, everything that we talked about, every step of the way that you took from being on a construction site and laying pipes, over being an engineer and constructing those pieces, over building your soldering training into turning your soldering training into the boot camp experience, ultimately going to the CEOs of the largest banks in the world. Every step that you take, I can still have I still see references in the boot camp experience. And it's just amazing. Every time we speak, I'm just like, oh yeah, I see that in the boot camp. Now I know where that comes from. And it's just this living, breathing thing that you didn't come up with in this room or in any other room overnight. It's a living, breathing thing that you gradually and constantly improved over time. Like Michael loves to say, you were eating your own cookie and you have crafted an experience for people like me or for people like CEOs that leaves marks. And on my side especially, it was not on the participant side, but I wanted to have more. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to be able to teach it at some point. So first of all, thank you for your time. Truly appreciated talking to you. And yeah.
Well, I'd like to put a capstone on it that's very important to me as to why it works and why it works the way it does. It gets at the heart of the human being, and it gets at the relationship humans have with each other. It's really a human intervention is what boot camp is all about. Just as the aircraft simulator is a human intervention. Yeah. The machine is predictable, and it's designed that way, and if you know what the design is, you can make the machine do what you want. But the human is not predictable, and the human is the one you have to work on. And so in the aircraft simulator, the pilot training operations don't look at themselves as a training operation. This is not training. Yeah. This is a human intervention to get at the human aspect of people and how they behave with each other and with the organizations they work in. So I've always tried to keep that, clear in my mind. But secondly to that is I brought some expressions out that sound ridiculous to most other people, but they are actually true. And some of them come from my father. Like if you're not going to do the job right, don't do it at all. Yeah. So I've added, because he knows that if you don't lay a pipe properly, to have to dig it up again and put a new one back in is not going to be as good as it was when it was done right the first time. Yeah. And quite likely 1 or 2 or 3 years later, you're going to have to come and dig it up again because it's going to start leaking or it's going to start break or whatever it is. You can't rework, because rework just makes everything go downhill. So I've come up with this expression, what value add is, that the customer is willing to pay for it. Yeah. And my father said that when we're laying pipe, that's how we get paid. That's what the government pays us for, is so many feet of pipe laid. They don't care whether we take a whole lot of time digging the trench or we take a whole lot of time of dropping it back in again, backfilling it. They don't care whether we're using hand shovels or backhoes or back diggers or hydraulic shovels or whatever. They just care about the pipe, and that's what they pay us for. So that's where the expression, the customer is willing to pay for it. Doing it once and only once came from my father laying pipe, because do it right, do it the first time and only once. If you stick to that, you'll save yourself. And the last one?
Changing in form and function, right?
If there's a change in form or function, and certainly laying pipe, there's a change in pipe. It gets longer every section you put in. Yeah. Okay. And function, it changes there because now it can carry water, whereas before it couldn't. Yeah. So that I say, let's apply that to everything. And I decided I'd apply it to everything that goes on in businesses, and I have never found one situation where it doesn't apply directly. But what it does do is show you that 80 to 90% of all the activities going on in a company are non-value added, because they don't fit this criteria. Yeah. And then the CEO of Bank of America was at a public speaking convention in California, I guess some months after this, and I heard via the grapevine that he had said, I went to this exercise called boot camp from a gentleman from Toronto, Canada, called boot camp. And in boot camp, he said that all the activities that we do as a management team, about 80% of them are non-value added. And I choose here and now to say I disagree with him. It's not 80%, it's 95%. And that's coming from, at the time, probably the highest paid senior executive in the USA at the time. And he was there for 3 or 4 years. And that's why these executives only have their tenure for 2 or 3 or 4 years. They pay them so high, such a high salary, that they have to retire and bring the next guy in. That's just off the top of my head. But anyway, that's when people get it. That's the kind of feedback I get, and that's my fuel to keep going and to keep living. Yeah. And now my fuel is to see you guys take this baton and carry it forward and be successful with it. Yeah. But you have to be totally believing in it and committed to it. And where it really pays off is it's not boot camp. It's what the people do with the experience of boot camp in the way they fly the airplane afterwards, the way I did. I was always very cautious because I knew what my killer items were. And I knew that I wanted to continue living, especially flying my family all around the world and all, down into South America and everything else. So that's what really drives me, is to see what people can do with it in their organization. But the bootcamp experience is a small intervention of time in a simulator. But when they come out of there and actually apply it, and they come back to you with a big smile on their face, saying, "You wouldn't believe what we found." I said, "Yeah, tell me about it." When I do believe what they find, because I know if you go looking for it, it's there, it's everywhere. It's everywhere you look. Waste, rework, it's all over the place. You wouldn't believe what we found. So the last, I know I probably ran out of shape. These guys, I said, I want you to go do something that's really important. This came to me just one day for the hell of it. I said, I want you to go, every one of you, and go talk to at least 5 or 6 of your customers, including you, Mr. CEO. Yep. I know his name, but I'll call him Mr. CEO. And I want you to find out from them, what are the dumb things that you as a bank, a big bank, do to your customers. And you're going to have to work on that, because they're not about to tell you what you as a bank do that's a dumb thing. But if you get them talking, they're going to tell you, "Why do you do this? You make me do this. I have to do that in order to sign your document. If I want my CD renewed, I have to go back to the bank and sign something. Why do I have to do that?" And I said, I want each of you to go out and make up a list by talking to customers and come back to me with a list of at least each of you having 5 dumb things you do to customers. And I want to see what that is. And I got a phone call literally 2 weeks later. They said, "You got to come to Charlotte. We want to show you what we've got." Yeah. I said, "Oh, did you find anything that was done?" They laughed like hell. Yeah. I got down there, and this is all, for them, this is a real show. They just loved it. And I got them all up to each one in front of everybody, read off what the dumb things are. Yeah. It was just fantastic, which launched them into taking this right across the company.
But still to this day, whether it's C-suite executives that talk to the customers, or whether it's the team actually reaching out to customers, maybe people that have never talked to customers before, but reaching out, being honest about it, and just asking them, where do we mess up? Why are we so dumb that you have pain doing business with us? And that's a very powerful tool to have people buy in. And I think that the crucial part that Michael, or that you told me through that method, this method is not about cost cutting. It's not about increasing efficiency just for the sake of increasing efficiency. It's the other way around. We talk to our customers, we want to improve our quality, we want to get it right the first time. And it's nice that efficiency and productivity go up as a side effect, but it's not the core of what we do.
But it yields huge reductions in cost.
Yes.
There's a difference between reductions in cost and cost cutting.
Yes.
Cost cutting signifies a knife.
Yeah.
We're going to have to cut something out, which is firmly grasping, staying inside your organization, which is people. That's there, it's everywhere, easy to cut people. Cost reduction is not necessarily getting rid of people. It can be actually adding people, but doing more value-added work, and the work that they do increases sales revenues. That's the big one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to round it out, coming back to the first story that you talked, going to the frontline workers and creating an environment in where they trust you, where you listen to them, and you create that bubble of trust. Not that you come in because you know better and you just want to get rid of them, rather you want to listen to them and improve their day-to-day operation. And I think if anything, this active listening, a method of empathy and creating a better experience for the people who are in the system, and ultimately the customers who are running the system, and on the top, the shareholders owning the business. I think this is what we do, and what you established is creating a system, a method, a checklist that creates win-win-win situations for everyone involved.
Well, the story I told you about Bank of America, where they got $300 million avoiding $300 million in cost. You could never do that in a cost-cutting exercise. You couldn't take $300 million that was allocated for IT systems, take that 300 million and put it back in the allocation box, yet to be allocated. You couldn't do that with cost reduction. Just no way.
But because
that's the difference between cutting costs and getting cost reduction.
Yeah, understanding the root cause of why it is, allowing people to ask why. And so after all that talk, probably John will kill us for it because we've ran over so much. But still, thank you so much, Michael, for your time, for sitting down with me, with us, talking to us. So
I hope it impacts people who listen to this.
I hope so too, yeah.
We're not here to sell something. We're here to realize the potential of something, and that we hope that we have a spark that will ignite for you the potential to become from a good company to a great company, or a good organization to a great organization. It's the spark that will set it off, and once you get it burning, it's hard to put it out.
True.
Like a wildfire.
I couldn't say a better last word. So thanks, Michael, for your time.
Okay.
And thanks to everyone listening. Hope you tune back in when we're back. And that's for that. Thank you,
if they tune back in, we'll make some more.
Yeah.
Make some more podcasts.
Perfect.
We can tell lots of stories.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Okay.